Thank you very much, Dan, and good evening to everybody. It's a great treat to be here and present tonight. We're going to be talking about tactical communications operations, and it's kind of the prelude to my March 3rd presentation that I'm going to be giving. It's from perspectives of a deployable, multiple deployments behind me. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. But at the end of the presentation, I'll put this slide back up so it has my email address, and if anybody has any questions or comments or hate mail, whatever, you can send it to me. I'm glad to have it. So let's go ahead and get started with our presentation. And by the end of it, we're going to be able to discuss, or during this presentation, we're going to discuss the use of tactical call signs and applicable FCC rules. We're going to discuss the difference between net control and dispatcher. And we're going to discuss the difference between RAGQ and incident communications. A little bit about me. So I'm a general class ham. I've been licensed since 1994. I was originally licensed as Kilo Echo 4 Papa Alpha Bravo. And during an unfortunate family tragedy, I learned that my grandfather, who I never knew, was licensed as Kilo November 4 Sierra Whiskey Bravo. And back in the 60s, for folks that are around that remember that, I don't, you had 1 year to upgrade from novice, at which time you dropped the N and you became K4. And or those of us in this area, he never upgraded, but he was responsible for getting my uncle into ham radio, who got my dad, and so on and so forth. Come from a family of amateur operators. Looked up the vanity call sign, and it had never been reissued, so I was able to get it through family connection, and I'm now KN for SWB. So carrying on the tradition. My background is primarily public safety communications. Today, I am a fire chief here in South Carolina. The bulk of my career is in fire and emergency management. Part of my job at the city is I serve as the city's emergency manager. My specialty is in disaster communications. Now, if you spend much time around on the internet, there's a lot of different terms for emergency communications now. There's different organizations, and all of them's the greatest organization that's ever been. But hey, look, let's face it, you can't get enough training in emergency communications. You can't get enough practice for emergency communications. So let's talk first about some professional communicator myths. Throughout the rest of this presentation, I'm going to refer to amateur radio operators as professional communicator. First one, hams can't be professional. It's against the rules. I've heard this more times than I care to imagine. Hams can't be professional. Well, I disagree. The rules don't say anything about being a professional. It says you can't be paid for what you're doing. You can't receive compensation for your services as an amateur radio operator. And when people that say, well, you can't be professional, well, what about volunteer firefighters? Can volunteer firefighters not be professional? I mean, they're volunteers. Of course they can. We expect them to be professional. We expect volunteer police officers, volunteer paramedics. We expect them to be professional. And when it comes to emergency communications, we should not expect anything less out of ourselves than to be professional. I don't need all that DHS training stuff. Well, if you're going to do emergency communications and your goal is to maybe work in an emergency operations center, or you want to work with a served agency, it would be a good idea for you to start looking into some of the DHS training, FEMA training, the ICS courses, so on and so forth. I'm going to dispatch hams to a disaster area and we'll set up our own comms. Well, there's a little acronym that we need to remember, and that acronym is AHJ, Alpha Hotel Juliet. That stands for the authority having jurisdiction. In other words, that served agency is the boss, and we got to work and we got to play with whoever that may be. We don't need to work together with other clubs, groups, organizations. Nothing could be farther from the truth. None of us have enough people to go around. None of us have enough people to man a major operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We must work with other clubs and organizations. So that's just a little bit of myths that I want to get into before we get started into tactical call signs. So let's talk about the FCC rules. A big misnomer, and I should have left this as a myth, was that you must use your FCC call sign to establish communications on amateur frequencies, and that's just simply not true. According to the Code of Federal Regulations, which the FCC can be found, 97.119, It says that you must identify at the end of each communication or at least every 10 minutes during a communication. Now, there's a big misconception about that. That doesn't mean when you're calling another station, you have to give your call sign every time you unkey. That's not what it means at all. When you've passed your traffic, you've passed your message, whatever else, at the end of that traffic, this is KN4SWB, or every 10 minutes. Now, in an emergency situation, we probably shouldn't be talking for 10 minutes. Let's just put that out there. You are not required to begin traffic with call signs. So Oscar's KP4RF, I do not need to call KP4RF. This is KN4SWB to establish communications. There's nothing in the rules that require that. I could legally say, hey, Oscar, what's up? And he could answer me. When we get done talking, we give our call signs, or every 10 minutes, whatever the case may be. And I know I'm kind of beating this a dead horse, but this is something that is really some parts of the country have this figured out, other parts not so much. So I really want to drive that home. So what is a tactical call sign? It's a designator other than your FCC issued call sign. It helps identify a specific location without knowing the call sign of the operator. This is very, very important. When you're working a long duration or a large scale event, you're not always going to know the call signs. If Dan and I are working at the EOC, or if Dan is my relief, for lack of better words, how's anybody going to know our different call signs? Well, we could put it out there, but if I didn't hear it, who knows? So it helps identify the specific location without having to know the call sign of the operator. And again, we're not required to use call signs to establish communications. So let's talk about some reasons why we might want to use tactical call signs. Your county experiences a no-notice event, which could be an earthquake, an explosion, a cut fiber line, or what about the Christmas morning bombing in Nashville? You know, that's a no-notice event. That's as no notice as it gets. Who expects something like that on Christmas morning? You experience this event and you need to contact the county EOC. Whose call sign are you going to use? I want you to think about that just a second. No-notice event pops off and you need to pass emergency traffic to your county EOC. Do you know whose call sign? What station is actually working at the EOC? Is it manned? Well, in this case, we're going to use the EOC's call sign. Or the tactical call sign of whatever you're counting. I'll show you some examples of that. You need to pass traffic to a local shelter, but the ham who is stationed at the shelter has left without notifying the EOC. How will you make contact with the shelter? Again, we're going to go back to assigning tactical call signs. You're working a county EOC and you have a message to send to the state EOC. You don't have a clue the individual call sign at the state. How are you going to send it? Tactical call signs should be simple and or geographic. Now, I've made these call signs for myself here based on my area. Pickens County EOC. Pickens County is the area in South Carolina where I live. South Carolina State EOC, that's a common call sign. Some people call it the state warning point here in South Carolina. Pendleton Street Shelter. It's a geographic location to this area. Pendleton Street, South 5th Street staging area, the Acme Fire ICC. For extra credit tonight, can anybody put in the chat what the ICC stands for? I wish I had some Jeopardy music. Does anybody know what ICC stands for? Pretty close, Barry, pretty close. But there is actually an acronym. Barry listed Incident Command Center. Incident Communications Center. Tom Delker wins the extra credit tonight. Well done, Tom. ICC stands for the Incident Communications Center, and it is often established and staffed at a large-scale incident. But each one of those would have a tactical call sign. And there is a high probability you could have amateur operators or professional communicators working in that ICC. So it's important that we share common terminology. The beautiful part about it is everybody in that ICC, if you call the Acme ICC, then folks are going to understand what that is. And Steve reminded me, tactical call signs are not the same thing as WinLink tactical addresses. Although they serve some of the same purposes, they are different. And I'm going to ask Steve to help me out in just a little while on some information on that. That is beneficial to everybody. So one of the things, and again, some of you may be watching this and going, "Look, this is kind of boring. We've got this. We got it figured out." But other parts of the country, not so much. In the ham radio world, everything we do revolves around our call sign. I mean, think about it. If you're checking into a net, it's all about, net control or the net control call sign, whatever it is. Everything revolves around call signs. And so all of a sudden we throw this tactical call sign mess in here, and we have people that are just kind of confused. But think about it. If I pick up the phone and I call Steve, I don't talk to him using call signs. If I pick up the telephone and I say, "Hey, Steve, this is Matthew. What's up?" Chances are when he answers the phone, he'll say, "Hey, Matt, what are you doing?" Those kinds of things. So, it's using tactical call signs is just like using a telephone. Hey, you, this is me. It's a good way to remember it. Hey, you, this is me. Acme ICC, this is South Fifth Street Staging. That's perfectly legal. It's acceptable. Everybody knows who you're calling, and everybody knows who's calling. Don't double dip. If you finally get embraced or you're using the tactical call sign, don't call the Pickens County EOC WR4 or WX4PG. This is South Pendleton Street Staging KN4SWB. That's not how it works at all. Remember, at the end of the conversation or every 10 minutes. Let's see, we get comments. I'm trying to keep track of all the comments. Oh, there's the tactical addresses he sent. That's exactly right, Don. Tactical call sign equals a functional descriptor. Very well done. That's a good example of it. Steve Waterman did share a document for me that's on the tactical use, because WinLink, although I'm not diving into WinLink tonight, it is very much a useful feature, because in the digital world, if you're using WinLink and you leave, the operator leaves the station, you could be expecting a lot of information that just gets lost in land, and tactical addresses will help with that significantly. All right, moving right along. So let's talk about the difference between net control or dispatcher. Certain events may need a net controller to coordinate traffic, while others may need a dispatcher. So if you're running a large scale logistics net, for example, and there's some health and welfare traffic that needs to be passed, there may be a place for a net control. However, typically in an instant communication center or an ICC, you're going to have what's called a RADO or an INTD, and those two acronyms stands for radio operator or incident tactical dispatcher. And there's a lot of bannering out and back about Auxcom is taking over, or the ARRL is this, or RACES is this. But the fact of the matter is Auxcom is not an organization. It's a training standard. That's the simple way to put it. But Auxcom helps the professional communicator understand the lingo of the public safety communication systems and incident command position descriptions. So if you've got the proper training, you could very well serve as an INTD or an incident tactical dispatcher, and which is a really, really good feature. From a guy that's done emergency management, that's had multiple deployments, I would have no problem whatsoever having somebody I knew was qualified and trained to assign them as a radio or an INTD, whether you're professional whether you're amateur radio operator or public safety communicator. Thank you, Don. Net control directs traffic to and from. A lot of times you can, again, I know some of this is redundant, but if you don't need a traffic cop on the radio, there's no need for a net control. If you need a traffic cop, you need to coordinate and consolidate communications, then absolutely. Ideally, in the perfect world, the net control is also tracking who's at each respective location, what call signs are in. What we learned in South Carolina through a couple of exercises, we tried to pass a large volume of voice traffic over a statewide net, and it quickly became bottlenecked. So just a quick plug here, the things that Steve's sharing on the board, WinLink, if you've got to pass health and welfare or general message, I mean, anything that you could pass in an email, WinLink's about is a really, really good place to do it if your organizations are set up to receive that. That is correct, Steve. Auxcom is a technical assistance catalog course similar to ComL, ComT, etc. Dispatcher directs and controls each station. So the dispatcher acts in a lot of ways like a net control operator, but the dispatch coordinates resources. In the public safety world, an individual, a truck, a single resource, a task force, a strike team, whatever the case may be, operates under the direction of the incident commander. But until they get assigned to that incident commander, they're being handled by the dispatcher. And the dispatcher is just a little bit more of a resource organizer. Anybody here familiar? Is anybody, let me, how I can ask this question. Has anybody here not been to an incident where you operated under an incident action plan? Let's see if I can make a poll. I don't know if I can do that or not. It's not going to let me do it. I was going to make a poll. Dan, could you make me a poll real quick? Dan, I must have put Dan to sleep. Let's try it this way.
What do you want to ask? I'll do a poll for you.
Yeah. Have you been a part of an incident with the, have you been a part of an incident that utilized an incident action plan, an IAP? Yes or no? Check yes or no.
Okay. Let me see if I can't do that. It's not going to let me do, hold on, launch. No, didn't let me do it. Dan's going to have to do it. Okay.
Well, that's all right. So an incident action plan. So when you go to an incident that reaches a certain point, and it depends on the organization, an incident action plan will be developed. And the incident action plan is basically the framework for the next operational period. In the public safety world, we typically do that in 12-hour increments. So you've been assigned to the county EOC or a shelter or an ICC, whatever the case may be. The incident action plan will have a lot of documentation within it. And that documentation is going to be relevant, specifically the ICS 205 and the ICS 217. And on top of that, the ICS 214 is important for you as well. It's your incident log. I just mentioned the ICS 205 is the communications plan. One of the things that we used to see a lot of is you had the public safety information, and then you had the ham radio information. Well, in an incident, the ICS 205 should encompass all communications. So what we started doing was we started making an ICS 205 that covered everything. If it was a communications frequency being used at this particular incident, we listed all frequencies on there. Your ICS 205 should identify alternate communications channels and frequencies. And again, this is going to tie back to your tactical call signs. Your tactical call signs are going to fall within an organization's structure, operations, logistics, so on and so forth. The communications objectives should be clear to everybody, and it's best accomplished by staffing a COML, communications unit leader. Again, this is talking about the net control of the dispatcher, because what you don't want to happen is you don't want the net control operator station, NCS, or your dispatcher to start assigning frequencies on a whim, because it may cause problems. A lot of times at the beginning of the presentation, I talked about building relationships with other clubs and organizations. You don't want to shift traffic off to another frequency only to find out that the other club is doing the same thing you are, but on that frequency. This time you have to do some communicating with that. That is correct. The ICS 205 comes from the ICS 217 pool. So in my area of the country, we have a lot of people that like to do rag chew. And you know, and I'll tell you, if you're a ham radio operator that lives to check in on the 2-meter net and the 440 net every night of the week and just scroll through the dial and check on, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's what ham radio is. It's a hobby. And if that's your hobby and that brings you enjoyment, rock on. You do that, you do you. Nothing wrong with that. RAGQ is for normal amateur communications, and is one of the things that makes amateur fun. Instant communications, however, are reserved for critical mission essential communications, no useless traffic. And I think that's one of the things that we see a lot of amateur radio operators struggle with, because 99% of their time spent on the radio is spent in that RAGQ or that net environment, and they never really reach outside of that. And so when the instant kicks off, you're still talking as if you're talking on the local RAGQ, and it doesn't work out. And again, it goes back to if you're going to be doing emergency communications, you got to shorten that traffic. And again, you got to learn the use of tactical call signs. Just keep it simple. It was surprising to me when I teach new hams how to perform tactical communications, how they really struggle with bringing that information down. And again, your organization, your locale may have a great handle on it. It may not be that big a deal to you. You may have it worked out, and great. Share your lessons learned with everybody else how to do that. Here's a good ICS 205 example. What I'm showing you here is an ICS instant communicator, the ICS 205, which is the form that lists all of the communications frequencies on a given for the given incident. And it could be, depending on your organization, depending on the incident, it could be multiple pages, but this is just a simple one. We have an operations net, and this, we've got the name of it, we've got what it's assigned to, and then we've got the frequency, PL tones, transmit and receive frequencies, transmit PL tones, as well as the mode. Is it analog? Is it digital? Is it mixed mode? Is there any specific information you need? Then the same thing, we've got an alternate as well. I guess in this case, Steve and stupid may be, I don't know, Steve. So what can I do to improve? All right, so the big question here is, if some of the terms I used are foreign to you, then I would strongly encourage you to enroll in an AUXCOM course near you. Again, AUXCOM is not an organization. It is a training standard, and it's a really, really good program from a guy that's done both, that has done ham radio on deployments and done public safety communications. It's time well spent, because it helps you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. And the AUXCOM position, or AUXC position within the incident management system, actually has a place. I just lost my whole train of thought. Yeah, it's part of the overall COMU, communications unit, which is every little piece makes that communications work. And there's a lot of pieces to that. Enroll in classes such as the ARRL's emergency communications courses. Great training, great program. Lots of stuff that can be done, that you can have. The ARRL's courses get a little bit more into the technical side than AUXCOM does. AUXCOM is just largely how do you integrate into the overall big picture in public safety world. Start rebuilding relationships with your local served agency. I was trying to get, when I was deputy emergency manager, I was trying to get one of our local hams to help me with building ham radio communications to our EOC, and this guy just fought me every way coming and going. I'm like, look, man, I need help. But essentially he was saying, we don't do it that way. We don't, that's not what we do. We do it this way. And, you know, there's so many times in so many cases where emergency managers have been the problem and ham operators have been the problem. You know, it's time to start building and rebuilding these relationships. And one of the ways you can do that is learn to speak their language, learn to speak that served agency's language, and not, we as hams, we have a bad problem. If the emergency manager asks us what time it is, we tell them how to build a clock. And you know, we've got to get beyond that. The reality is the more that we can speak and act and talk like these folks, the more capabilities we're going to bring to the table, because a lot of public safety officials that are coming into the workforce never remember a time where technology didn't exist. So think about that just a second. The vast majority of emergency managers don't know a life without technology. So it's hard for them to fathom their need for you. So by learning to do the by learning to do the communications or to speak their language by using tactical call signs, you actually bring more credibility to the organization and to what your service is. But I can't stress enough, start building and rebuilding relationships with your local served agency. We started something a long time ago called interoperability starts at Burger King. And the short term of that is if you and I'll sit down and have a cup of coffee, eat a burger together, there's not much that we can't overcome. We can't work together. So in summary, tactical call signs are legal, regardless of what people say. Oh, he's full of crap. It's in the rules. It's in the Code of Federal Regulations. Tactical call signs are legal. You just have to learn how to use them and be good stewards. Don't forget, when you end your traffic, KN4SWB. If you're on there for more than 10 minutes in a real world emergency, you probably need to be quiet. Know when to staff a net control or a dispatcher. They're two different things. Don't forget the KISS principle. Keep it short, Steve. And who is the COML? Who is the communications unit leader for your event? Do you know who that is? Because in the public safety world, comms works for the COML. Let's see here. That is a very good point, Barry. Net control is a tactical call sign. Very good port. Let's see, the COML, my first assignment request would be hopefully for my comm center manager, and then second would be a really broad-based AUX-C, followed then by a radio, CommT, etc. I tell you, that's a good conversation, Don, and really you could get into the chicken or the egg on that one. I think it would be incident dependent in my experience. One of the first positions I staffed during the Pinnacle Mountain Fire was the CommT. We had a lot of technical challenges that we had to overcome before we could work anything else out. So as we were developing the communications plan, we had to make sure we could do what we thought we could do. But absolutely good plan there. Any questions? It's hard to belabor. It's hard to really belabor tactical call signs. One thing, and I kind of hit on it earlier, Steve shared the PDF document with everybody. And Larry, I'll come to you in just a second. He shared that PDF document, and I would challenge everybody to take a look at that. It really gives a good step on how to use tactical addresses for WinLink, which are tactical call signs, but in the WinLink world. And there are two different things. So Larry, let me see if I think you're unmuted. Go ahead, Larry, with your question.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to bring up is that you didn't really press on too much was flexibility. Being able to not only deploy, but also change your operations. Like General Patton said, best plans are great until the first shot's fired.
That's right.
I've been exposed to a couple of incidents here in the Antelope Valley where, let's just say, here's how we're going to do it. And then 10 minutes later, we're having a problem. So I
Very
think that's
much
something
so.
else. Just like when you're working with teams other than communicators that think they are. Like we had one where everybody decided to have their own tactical call sign, each individual, instead of having it. In other words, I was talking to a guy named Bulldog, and what is a bulldog? So that's why I like your presentation. It really brings that. And I just wish the non-professionals would take the course.
Well, and I tell you, a lot of it too is sometimes it's a paradigm shift. We've done it this way for so many years. We were taught this way by people who taught us, who are our Elmers, and and now I truly believe amateur radio brings a unique skill set to the public safety environment, and we're living in a world that every day it seems like there's a new cyber threat, and we're the folks that can really step in and fill some of those gaps. We just need to be sure that we're doing our part to make sure that we're useful and beneficial, and we really are. But we just, some ways, I guess, we're marketing. Oh, good, Gary. That's a great. Thanks, Gary, for a great reminder. One of the things that we started doing in South Carolina, our communications exercises are no longer public safety communications exercises and then amateur radio communications exercises. We're doing everything together. Last year, we had a communications event where we brought and we took, I'd love to say we were geniuses at it, but we took a tip from North Carolina's playbook. North Carolina's been doing this for years. But our ESF2 coordinator in South Carolina is a guy named Dennison Coomer. And Dennison had an idea to bring everybody together. So we had different stations set up across the fire academy grounds, the State Fire Academy grounds. And we had a Shares WinLink station. We had a station where you had to put up a temporary repeater and all kinds of things like that. But all of it had to go through the process. And really it was agnostic as the event type. But by lunchtime, you couldn't tell who the public safety guys were and who the ham radio guys were, which is what we wanted. They were in teams together. And so you saw skill sets that excelled. So the public safety guys were really, really good with programming P25 radios, but the ham radio guys were really, really good at thinking outside the box of making things work with baling twine and tape. And that's again, it goes back to the skill sets that we talk about. Yeah, Dustin, it was a great learning experience. Any other questions? Don, I appreciate the comments. That's something I don't like to belabor points, but I really just want, and Dan, I got your message about sharing, sending you the presentation. I really, really, really am passionate about this. You fight the way you train. Practice and only practice makes everyone learn their part as a member of the team. Absolutely, Dan. If I could hit on anything to leave you with is start right now building a relationship. Start right now reinforcing that relationship, building that trust. It's one thing to show up as a credentialed member of a team, but it's a whole other thing entirely when you recognize the voice. I know Dan, I know Dustin, I know that's somebody I can trust. Thank you very much, Tom, very much. Any other questions, comments? This is something I like doing. So since it's a relatively small group, what would you like to see? What would you want to, is this relevant to you? Is it something you'd like to know more about? We also need to stress. Go ahead, Oscar.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. It's really interesting. This is an argument that I always have about tacticals, and also when you start talking with people, no need to identify. You might say, Jose, how are you? Or Matthew, how are you? It's Oscar. And continue working from then on, and be sure that identify yourself before every 10 minutes and at the end of the conversation. That's what it says, the rules. But somehow the old timers, they believe that you have to identify at the beginning. But I don't do that. Anyway, definitely what I want to see in the future is specifically how to build a Go kit, how to be an emergency kit. And also as well that I will be interested in is, do you have experiences with the OSCOM team and bring some of those experiences into the group so they can get a real sense. And they will know how they perform as ham radio operator, but compare with the professional communicators. That will be an excellent presentation, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. And if you can be here on March 3rd, you're going to hear exactly that. I'm going to talk about my deployments because there's one of the guys, one of my team members, one of my teammates from our state fire comm is on here, and both of us are licensed amateur operators. We never go into the field without both. We never go into the field without our public safety communications as well as our amateur capability. And a lot of times our amateur capability gives us more capability than some of our public safety, especially when you look at technologies like WinLink or FLDigi or that suite of programs. We've really, March 3rd will be a lot of fun, and you're going to see some things that we're not unique. Now we are unique on one of the things that I'll show you, but we're not unique with most of it. So I I would welcome everybody. Oh, there's another one of my teammates. Greg is there as well. Perhaps show the ICS chart showing the unity of command, etc. for com. I'm gonna make myself a note to add that in to, I'm gonna add that in for the March 3rd one. If I forget, Don, please remind me. I've got plenty of them that I can show. Very good comments. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, Steve, we really do a lot of really do a lot of cross coordinating between North Carolina, South Carolina. Tennessee's starting to do more with us. We really love it, and we welcome anybody to see. There's some great people that's doing some great things in South Carolina. Gabe Turner, Roger Mole, Gary Leonard, people like that are really have really chewed up a lot of ground. And Gary, just to put it, that's a good, God, I couldn't even think of that. You'll see this. I'm burning up all my stuff from March 3rd, Dan. I'm sorry. Gary Leonard, I actually was the COM-L for Hurricane Florence for State Fire USAR, HART, several of the programs. And one of our forward operating bases in Marion, South Carolina, lost all communications. So we actually tasked South Carolina ETV's communications trailer to deploy to Marion, South Carolina. And Gary Leonard, ham radio operator, a professional communicator in every sense of the term, deployed with that trailer and provided the only voice and internet to the public safety first responders in Marion for several days. And so, you know, don't think that just because you're a ham radio operator, you're not professional, or you don't have the ability, or you don't. I assure you from firsthand experience, you do. Any other questions? Dan, thank you so much for including me on the RATPAC planning and for allowing me the opportunity to present tonight. It's a thrill. We've done some good things, but we've learned a lot of lessons along the way.
It's been a pleasure. Excuse me, my cough came at a very bad time. You've been a great addition to the planning committee, and we appreciate what you're doing. And this has been a great presentation you're doing right here. Appreciate this. Appreciate you.
Thank you very much, Matt. You guys really lead the pack, no question.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I'm going to turn it back to you, Dan. I am done. Thank you all for taking your time out this evening to listen to me ramble and banner and get on soapboxes. I appreciate it. And I look forward, try to pencil in March 3rd. I think you'll enjoy it. It's going to be a great presentation of where public safety and ham radio meet on a real deployment.